Yesterday, I published my Borderlands 4 benchmark data, covering over 40 GPUs at 3 resolutions with 2 quality presets, and the results were pretty bad. Using the highest quality preset, labelled Badass, current generation GPUs such as the 9060 XT and 5060 Ti couldn't even average 30 FPS at native 1440p, while dropping all the way down to the medium preset still saw us fall short of 60 FPS, a frame rate that most PC gamers consider to be the bare minimum. As a result, the game has been very poorly received by gamers, as most systems suffer from extremely low frame rates, and even high-end systems have to lean heavily on technologies such as upscaling. Given the backlash, the developer, and Nvidia it would seem, have been working hard to justify performance, while doing their absolute best to convince you that frame generation is actually a performance-enhancing feature, which thankfully most gamers now know not to be the case. Now, since publishing my benchmark data, the game has seen a second patch, and not only that, but Gearbox Software in collaboration with Nvidia have published an extensive optimization guide for GeForce users. So that being the case, I thought we could go over some of their settings and then do some testing of our own, but before we get into it, today's sponsor spot is brought to you by Ugreen and their MagFlow 2-in-1 wireless charger, featuring new and improved Qi 2 wireless charging. For a world first, Ugreen are boasting wireless charging performance with 25 watt of efficient uninterrupted power delivery, and that's a significant improvement over the previous 15 watts. The MagFlow integrates Apple's MagSafe magnetic alignment concept to improve charging efficiency and safety, while still maintaining compatibility with Android and other wireless charging capable devices. It also supports USB-C charging at 5 watts, which can be used in conjunction with the 2 wireless pads for a total of 35 watts of charging power. Ugreen has also released a 10,000 mAh power bank, which works the same way, but rather than a vertical phone charger, it supports an integrated USB-C cable. These units are compact, making them the perfect travel companion, or great options for a minimalistic desktop. If you'd like to learn more about the Ugreen MagFlow lineup, please check the link in the video description. Okay, so initially Gearbox Software published very little in the way of required system specifications for Borderlands 4. The minimum and recommended PC specs didn't list a target resolution or frame rate, or even the preset they were suggesting you use. But shortly after releasing the game, we did get an update on this, which I covered in my previous video. Now, however, we have an extensive guide for a number of GeForce GPUs covering the 1080p, 1440p, and 4K resolutions, with frame rate targets. We also have a new patch which claims to address system stability, but doesn't note any performance improvements. And having now retested half a dozen Radeon and GeForce GPUs, I can confirm there are no performance improvements with this updated patch, so it really is just addressing stability. So that being the case, all of my previous data still stands. Now, the Nvidia optimization settings are pretty basic. For 1080p, they're universally recommending DLSS quality upscaling, which is reasonable enough. Then for GPUs that support frame generation, they recommend you enable it, so 2 times for GeForce 40 series and 4 times for GeForce 50 series GPUs. Then at 1440p, they're typically recommending you use balanced upscaling and then performance mode for 4K. Again, both reasonable enough. Now, frame generation can be useful for smoothing out the presentation, but it doesn't help with latency and is therefore not a performance-enhancing feature. Personally, I prefer to play without it enabled, but it certainly can be of benefit depending on your preferences there. But what I found really odd about the Nvidia optimization guide was one of the first recommendations I saw, which was for the GeForce RTX 2080 Ti, targeting just 30 FPS at 1080p. Now, I know the game is really demanding or unoptimized, whichever term you prefer, but 30 FPS for a 2080 Ti does seem a bit too low. Not only that, but the entire optimization guide seems very AI generated, given the number of glaring issues. For example, why is Nvidia recommending that RTX 2080 Ti owners turn texture quality down to medium on an 11GB graphics card? They're also recommending 4 times frame generation on an RTX 5050, which would just be a truly awful experience. So that's all very interesting, and I think it's time we go and take a look. Firstly, here's how the 2080 Ti plays when simply selecting the medium quality preset at 1080p with DLSS quality upscaling. I'm just testing a very early section of the game. I'm sure it gets more demanding as you progress through the game, but for now, this is where I've done the bulk of my testing. Using the medium preset, the 2080 Ti is typically seen rendering around 70 FPS, so significantly better than the 30 FPS Nvidia suggests, which is good news. We are of course at just 1080p with quality upscaling enabled, so that's not exactly amazing performance given the conditions, but it is certainly playable using the 7-year-old flagship GPU. Now, if we load up the Nvidia Optimised settings, making sure to reset the game after every new settings change has been applied, and then waiting 15 minutes for the phantom shaders to recompile, as recommended by the game developer, we find that the average frame rate is now more around 80 FPS, so around a 10 to 15% performance boost. Certainly not amazing, and crucially the game does now look significantly worse. In fact, the level of detail is horrible. The game looks flat and I'd say worse than the previous installment. So that's a bit crap. Well, it's very crap, and I can certainly understand why gamers are upset with how poorly this game runs, given how underwhelming the visuals are, especially using these quality settings. To illustrate this point, here is the RTX 2080 Ti playing Cyberpunk 2077 at 1080p, with quality upscaling and the medium quality preset enabled. This game, in my opinion, looks significantly better, with loads more detail. It's really not even a comparison, despite the fact that I'm currently making it. Now in this example, the RTX 2080 Ti is comfortably rendering well over 100 FPS, and in this test averaged over 130 FPS, with 1% lows of around 100 FPS. This means the 2080 Ti is rendering around 85% more frames than Cyberpunk 2077 when compared to what we're seeing in Borderlands 4, and both games are using the medium preset at 1080p with quality upscaling. Again, not an apples to apples comparison, but I think you guys get where we're going with this. Even if we switch to the high preset in Cyberpunk, the RTX 2080 Ti is still looking at around 120 FPS on average, with 1% lows of about 90 FPS. So that's around 70% better performance than what we're seeing in Borderlands 4. So with Borderlands 4 allowing for an average frame rate of around 70 FPS, what do we have to do to knock Cyberpunk 2077 down to that same performance level with an RTX 2080 Ti? The answer is hardware accelerated ray tracing. Using the ray tracing low preset, we saw an average of 80 FPS, so about 15% faster than what was seen in Borderlands 4. And therefore, this level of performance is comparable to the Nvidia optimized settings, which just looked awful. Again, we're obviously making an apples to oranges comparison, but I think most people will agree that when using the medium preset in both games, Cyberpunk 2077 does look better. Or at the very least is comparable, but I think that's being extremely generous to Borderlands 4. And again, Cyberpunk was allowing for around 80% greater performance. Let's change gears now and take a look at the 5060 Ti 8GB. And we'll start with how this GPU performs at 1440p using balanced DLSS upscaling with the high preset. We're looking at around 60 FPS under these conditions with poor frame time performance, and I found aiming quite difficult at these frame rates. The game does look very nice though, with the high preset, but the frame rate and frame time performance of the 8GB 5060 Ti is not good. So let's see what Nvidia recommends for us. Right, so Nvidia is recommending high quality geometry and texture quality with very high texture streaming speed, but then most other settings are set to low, such as foliage density, volumetric fog and cloud, shadow quality, and reflections. So overall, pretty low quality settings, and as you'd expect, this does boost FPS quite a bit, allowing for an average of over 80 FPS, and that's around a 30% increase in performance, and the game does now play notably better, but also, it does look notably worse. For example, here is a side-by-side comparison, and what you'll notice most is the difference in lighting effects along with the general detail levels, but this isn't the best example I have. This is a better example of the stark difference in visual quality between the high preset and Nvidia's suggested optimized settings for RTX 5060 Ti owners for 1440p gaming. Granted, their settings improve performance by 30%, but the cost to visuals is massive. You're basically playing a different game at this point, and I'd argue that the previous title looks better. In fact, let's go look at that now. Believe it or not, this is the RTX 5060 Ti playing the now 6-year-old Borderlands 3. at native 1440p, as there's no upscaling tech here, and we're also using the maximum in-game preset, which is of course labelled as badass. Not only does the game look quite good, better than the Nvidia optimized settings for Borderlands 4 in my opinion, but it also played at over 100 FPS, again at native 1440p. I actually found myself enjoying Borderlands 3 more, simply because of how much better it played, and honestly after a few minutes I forgot this version is actually 6 years old. So it seems pretty clear that gamers just want games that are fun to play. A crazy concept, I know. Speaking of which, here's Cyberpunk 2077 again, this time using the RTX 5060 Ti 8GB at 1440p with balanced upscaling, and we'll start with the medium preset. Here we're looking at an average of just over 120 FPS, so again the game played extremely well, and once again in order to dumb frame rates down to Borderlands 4 levels, I had to enable the Ray Tracing Low preset. Here we're looking at an average frame rate of around 70 FPS, so comparable to the performance seen in Borderlands 4 using the High preset. So there you have it, the most recent patch doesn't include any performance optimizations, it merely addresses the numerous stability concerns, which is obviously still a big deal, and I am happy to report that during this updated testing I didn't encounter a single crash, so that's some progress. Sadly though, performance even with the lowest quality presets is still extremely underwhelming, and Nvidia's optimized settings aren't terribly useful as they just make the game look crap while slapping a band-aid on the issue in the form of frame generation, which I didn't bother to enable for this testing as it doesn't improve performance. It's a smoothness feature, and how effective it is does depend on a few variables that we've already covered when looking at this technology in dedicated content. The Borderlands 4 problem is really simple. The game doesn't run anywhere near well enough given the visuals. Maxed out, this is a beautiful game, but so too is Cyberpunk 2077, and as we've seen, that game runs considerably better. Worse still, when using the lowest quality presets, Borderlands 4 looks pretty bad, while still performing very poorly. Games like Cyberpunk 2077 actually manage to look quite good using the medium preset, and better yet play at very high frame rates using modest hardware. Not only that, but Borderlands 3 can be maxed out using a GeForce RTX 5060 Ti and still deliver over 100 FPS, and it looks better in my opinion than Borderlands 4 when trying to target a similar frame rate. And I do emphasize trying there because you can't really do it. Borderlands 3 will run at much higher frame rates. So Borderlands 4 somehow manages to look worse while delivering lower frame rates. Pretty impressive stuff. The game is clearly an unoptimized mess, and this is something the game developer will need to address. That said, Tim is working on an optimization guide as we speak, and that should be available later this week, so I'm very keen to see what he finds there and what settings he ultimately ends up recommending. Until then though, well, that might do it for my Borderlands 4 coverage, at least for now, unless we get some sort of performance-related patch. So if you appreciate all the testing we've been doing, give the video a like, subscribe for more content. You will not want to miss Tim's optimization guide because it's going to go into a lot of detail about the various settings and their performance impact, visual impact, all that sort of stuff. The usual optimization guides. We actually did one for Borderlands 3, which was very popular, and a lot of people have actually gone back and watching that again. Maybe they're picking up Borderlands 3 after being disappointed with Borderlands 4 and looking for ways to optimize the game. Not sure, but that video has seen an uptick in views. Anyway, other than that, we have the join button or Patreon. If you want to become a Harbour Unboxed member, click either one of those and you'll get access to our exclusive Discord server, that if you sign up, of course. Monthly live streams, Q&A stuff, behind the scenes content. So check that out if you're interested, but if not, that's perfectly fine. And I would like to thank you for watching this video. I'm your host, Steve. See you again next time.